It's Wizards versus Lesbians, a podcast for your ears. Hello and welcome to Wizards versus Lesbians. My name is Isaac.
I'm Alexis.
And today we are discussing The Spear Cuts Through Water by Simon Jimenez. And apparently I'm doing the plot, so
Yes.
I will go ahead and do the plot. We are in fantasy Southeast Asia. It is a land ruled over by the Moon Throne, a dynasty of kings who have magical powers invested in them by the moon, who is not in the sky. There is, in fact, just a sort of a weird scar in the sky where the moon should be. They dominate this land and its 5 powerful families with their magical abilities. But one day the king wakes up and finds that his pet bird has gone missing. And that pretty much starts a series of events which will lead to the downfall of his entire dynasty. And this happens through our protagonists, who are one of his grandsons, a peacock warrior, and a northern barbarian named Kima, who is missing his left arm through circumstances. And they go on a magical journey together, along with various other critters and supporting characters, and eventually things happen. But actually, all of this is taking place in a sort of a mystical time and space bending water and moon theater, because you, the second person who is reading the book, are actually an American in the mid 20th century who is reading this book or watching this thing, because it has a whole cute narrative device thing going on.
I don't think it says. Is it specifically you, an American?
Well, you're in fantasy across the water from fantasy Southeast Asia.
I mean, yeah, but
so you could be anywhere in the American continent,
right?
So American in that sense.
Yeah, I think that sums it up pretty well.
Yeah, framing device was the phrase that I was searching for there. We're both pretty tired and I'm sick, so we're going to do our best with this. I do apologize if my voice gives out. So why should you read this book?
We forgot the important first questions.
Oh, of course. And the reason that we forgot it is, are there lesbians in this book?
Absolutely none.
There are no lesbians in this book.
Or there might be some lesbians in this book that I didn't notice, but none of the major characters are lesbians.
The ocean does not have a gender reveal.
That's true. You could argue that the romance between the moon and the ocean is, Yuri.
In that it involves a lot of yearning and then a huge disaster caused by miscommunication. It's Yuri. Yes. But for the major focus of the book is on the relationship between our two male protagonists.
This is, in fact, gay boys versus witches, the inverse of wizards versus lesbians.
But there are wizards.
Yes, there are wizards.
And in fact, I would say they spend most of their time fighting wizards rather than witches in the end. So.
Oh, absolutely. But the person who sort of takes on the, what's usually the wizard figure role of being sort of manipulative and destructive and self-centered is very much a witchy archetype, given that she is the moon.
Indeed. It's the moon, folks. Yes, so there are not lesbians, there are witches. We are in uncharted territory here. But
we got multiple requests to cover this, and we thought it would be fun to do a sort of inverse book.
Yes, and it was certainly interesting. So why should you read this?
It's got some great visuals, great imagery all the time.
Yes, it does. And for the most part, the pacing is, and well, I'll put it this way. I would have given you my unreserved recommendation for this book until about 3/4 of the way through it.
Yes.
But up until that point, it's a really rollicking adventure. It's funny. It's interesting. The world is fascinating. It's like full of grand guignol and, fighting and sorcery and, intrigue.
Mm-hmm.
Just a fun time. And then it sort of stops being that. um,
Yes. It's well, we can get into that in the spoiler zone.
yes.
But yes, it's got the. I would agree that the first three quarters are a great sort of epic adventure story. And it's got great imagery and slightly overwrought, but really quite beautiful writing.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I also just want to give a shout out, which I rarely do, but the audiobook performance is superb. This
Oh,
is not
nice.
this is not an easy book to do for an audiobook because there's like 9 million viewpoint characters who like jump in and out over the course of a sentence because of the aforementioned framing device. And the narrator Joel de la Fuente does an excellent job of keeping everything straight, and also does a lot of really good character voices,
Oh,
including a sort
nice.
of Orson Welles inflected Lou Boo, which is really something. So I'd like to. I think he's the best narrator that we've gotten since Moira Quirk, so I wanted to give props to him.
Cool. I wonder if I might have liked this book a little bit more if I were capable of experiencing it through the audiobook.
I was certainly more charmed than I might otherwise have been. I think, but sadly, again, that didn't last. Um,
So why shouldn't you read this book? Well, I found the ending. I found the last quarter of the book to be kind of a letdown. It just sort of
we
drags.
lose most of our interesting characters,
Mm-hmm.
and we lose most of our interesting ideas. Um, and what remains is struck me as strangely fascist, actually. Um, it sort of simultaneously let me down on a structural level, a narrative level, and a political level.
Yeah, I gotta say, the that was a big part of it for me. Although, really, it was just that I was willing to forget. The book is kind of self indulgent.
Yes.
As I said, it's very beautiful, somewhat overwrought writing, for example. And there's a lot of things that are clearly there simply to be pretty, but are not really contributing to anything. And I was way more forgiving of this when everything is moving along at a good pace and we're getting, uh, things are getting revealed at reasonable times, and things are continuing to happen and stay interesting. And as that stops or slows down, it ends up feeling much more self-indulgent, to my and thus extra frustrating, I think.
I had the thought after at a certain point where it's like, if this wasn't as beautifully written and performed as it is, like this is not that far from Tomoe Gozen. It has the sort of the same bones at the end of the day.
Including that sort of, just like bouncing from scene to scene with, huge changes that don't necessarily, and like changing what kind of story it is. Another reason I'm just going to be upfront. Another reason why I was not as into this book, I think, from the get go as you were, is that I think that his previous book, The Vanished Birds, has many of the same problems. Of
Okay.
it builds up, it seems like it's going somewhere really, really interesting, and then the ending just felt extremely flat, and disappointing. And
Yes,
so
I
I was
had that
already
thought.
coming into this book feeling like the author just didn't. It was already coming into this with me being kind of skeptical, and there wasn't a lot of trust of, are you going to get where you're going? And so, you know, when we didn't get where anywhere interesting where we were going, I was like, well, that's what is it about this author that keeps that's leaving me this emotional gap, between how I came into the book feeling and how I finished.
Yeah, no, that reminded me of the other author that really came to mind at around that point in the book, who is Neil Stevenson. Um, because, there's a lot of really sort of gonzo balls out, action and interesting ideas that are a little bit more, hyped up and violent and gross and like keep you in, but and then when it's time to make it add up to something, it doesn't. Um, and if you were a fan, to go back to why you should read this, if you are a fan of Neil Stephenson, this is better than many of his books.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I actually, despite having just said that this author's disappointed me twice, I think that it's, inappropriately harsh to compare him to Neil Stephenson.
No,
This book has a lot more going for it.
Neil Stephenson's not a byword for failure for everybody the way that he is for us. But
Yeah, but I mean, like, among other things, this book is beautiful in a way that Neil Stephenson has never been able to pull off.
yes, this man is a better writer than Neil Stephenson.
Significantly.
Yes.
And also, well, the ending, in both cases, the endings left me feeling kind of empty. At least the book's end.
Yes, there is that. It would be hard to suggest otherwise. Yeah, so I'm being harsh just because I was flying pretty high with it, and then it let me down. And there is that, you get that sort of personal, unction that one takes in circumstances like that.
Yes.
But so do factor that into our criticisms here.
Yeah, and I mean, also the book is pretty chunky. But if you're a fast reader or you want something to occupy you for a while, I mean,
I got through this 17-hour book in 1 week with no problem. It kept me going.
oh yeah, I mean, I got through this book over one Shabbos.
Yeah.
And so yeah, I don't know. I mean, like, I don't want to be like, don't read it. I think if you go in understanding that the ending isn't going to that a lot of the mysteries and stuff and symbolism isn't necessarily going to pay off in a satisfying manner, but you think you can just enjoy the ride, then definitely go ahead and read this.
All right. So let us move on to content warnings, of which there are a lot.
Oh, God.
Our old friend cannibalism is back.
Yes, there's so much horrible violence and body horror, mutilation.
This book is really about mutilation. I think that's one of I would go so far as to call that one of the main themes of this book.
There's sexual assault in this book, but it's
off screen.
It's off screen, and some of it is sort of treated very matter of factly, like with the whole to deal with the moon.
Yeah, there's like mind control and sort of mental doubling in ways that we've experienced before. People go crazy. This one is generally not for the faint of heart. There's a lot of really brutal stuff in it.
No, this would make a great anime, though.
Yeah, and also animal death.
Oh yeah, that's true. Animal death.
Mm-hmm. So that having been said, shall we get into it?
Yeah.
Spoiler zone. There's a chord for you. So here is a problem when you're writing a mask for mask gay romance.
Mm-hmm. I'm very curious to hear where this is going.
Well, the problem is that June and Kima are very, very, very similar in their narrative voices. And like they're both honorable warrior, brave idiots. Like one of them is an angsty honorable warrior, brave idiot, and one of them is a more crafty honorable warrior, brave idiot. But they're still like largely just sort of talk to each other like teenage lunkheads, except in the sort of medieval style that the author enjoys using here. And playfully dipping in and out of, I might add, which I enjoy. But the upshot, this works fine when there are other characters.
Yeah.
When they have the tortoise and the empress and various other folks going along with them in their journey, it's like it doesn't really matter that they are, they can do their like we're fighting instead of fucking bit, which was funny to me every time.
Oh
like,
yeah.
And that's fine. But during the end bit when it's just the two of them and then we get joined for another character by a a girl who has exactly who is a teenage lunkhead honorable warrior, you know, and is essentially the same character as they are. Um, it gets kind of monotonous, um, which is which is a problem when it's supposed to be like the sort of the climax of the both the plot of the book and of the romance.
Yes.
So like I don't think that I don't think it's of course that it is impossible to do, you know, good mask for mask gay romance writing. Obviously, it's just that they can't be as exactly the same as these two. um, IMO for it to be a success.
Yeah, and I mean, part of it's that their intricate rituals were more interesting than their actual romance.
I do have intricate rituals written here in my notes as
I
well.
just like, all the ways in which they were sublimating their desire for each other just ended up being much more interesting than the love story, unmasked.
Yeah, their most interesting character dynamics were when they were making fun of each other, you know, and being mean and fighting and uh, suspecting each other. Yeah, that definitely sort of makes it a problem when the book is structured in a way that like the reward that we get, like the sort of you know the book takes a very sort of fatalistic, um, the cycle will continue forever sort of tone right up until that last bit where you know stand up and say, but I thought it was a love story. My grandma told me it was a love story, and the the cast of the show wink at you and was like, we were waiting for somebody to say that. Da, 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 here they're
Right.
fucking, you know. Um, and it's supposed to be like this liberatory, send them home happy moment, and like it's good sex writing, but it does not have it. It certainly doesn't have the weight to counter what came directly before it.
Yeah,
So
and I mean the other thing is that I don't know. I gotta say the framing device fell a little bit flat for me. It just the I didn't feel like it was interest I didn't feel like the framing device was of the theater of dreams or whatever was interesting enough. Um and to really make that work as the climax as like the sort of linchpin moment. Um it almost felt like, well, the story isn't capable of resolving on its own because there's not enough here. So we're going to have to use this really heavy-handed device to intervene. Um, and and like also, since when do love stories since when does the fact that it's a love story mean that it has to be happy?
yeah, I like I appreciated the whole framing device at the start. Although it did mean that things got off to a relatively slow start,
Yes.
and I might not have bothered to continue um, to get to the actual story if I hadn't been doing it for the podcast. But but I didn't mind it up until Kima and June descended into the underworld and appeared on stage as themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Um, because I was like, okay, I didn't like it. I was like, okay, this is too precious, and was also a complete waste of time,
Mm-hmm.
and killed the pacing stone dead after it had been going on a
Completely.
defined clip for for a very long time. B, like, I don't need me, the me, the second person. I don't need to be involved in this. um, I don't like what it means that this whole like multi-generational sort of inheritance of culture thing is key to this moment. And also like and then it gave us a a prophecy of doom, which then the book cheated out of, which
Right.
is a giant no-no as far as I'm concerned. So really, it managed to fuck things up three ways at once. And I thought it was okay up until that point,
Yeah, it slowed everything down.
Yeah, it did. I mean, but everything went at a really good clip otherwise.
Yeah, I guess that's fair. I think it's also just that I mean, the thing is that I also felt like I didn't need to be told that this was supposed to be a sort of, mythological epic.
Oh God. I mean,
And I
like,
felt like so much of the framing device was supposed to be like, it almost felt like a sort of a lack of trust in the reader to understand, no, this is what I'm doing.
yeah, and like the another issue with that was that it became like it became more strident with that and during that very last part of the book at the same time as
Yeah,
it sort of hit you on the head. It's like, okay, yes, I understand that you're going for like, deep mythological majesty here because here's Grendel, you know,
right.
thanks. you know, oh, is this in fact Gilgamesh and Enkidu that you've presented us with? Oh, okay, great, thanks. I noticed. Um, you know, we're just we're playing the hits. We're doing them all here, folks. you know, and like, and the problem with going, and this is the other issue that I have. The problem with shoveling that deep into sort of the past to get at your very powerful like folktale saga symbols is that you're dredging a whole bunch of other stuff back with you inevitably,
Mm-hmm.
which I don't like a lot of it. And a lot, for example, the stuff about disability that comes with that stuff.
Yes, and actually, the treatment of the third brother, I felt like really the third brother very much felt kind of like a caricature of a disabled, um, like intellectually disabled child, young person.
Yeah, no, that felt gross to me.
It did. It felt, and the whole, especially around like his crush, and it felt really gross to me, and it was really disappointing.
It's such a waste of a shapeshifter. It's such a waste of a bird. It's such a waste of a kid with a wolf for a head. Your fear is completely absurd. Get with the modern age where we just want to fuck him. Yeah, the thing about the three terrors, right, is that, I feel like we've started off with Kima who doesn't have his left arm, right? And Kima faces, discrimination because of this visible mark of his, shaming or his ill luck on him.
Right, and and that is a nice that I thought that was a well handled sort of pointing to the ways that disability get culturally constructed. That the real thing that about for Kima isn't that he is missing an arm. It's what the culture says about him missing an arm. That did, of course, mean that his lack of an arm never really came up except culturally. But
Yeah. But like I think it's like this is one of those books that ends up arguing against itself
yes,
because it makes the overt point and then it proceeds to tell the rest of the story, which relies a lot on uh, horror of the other, as a lot of these
yes,
very old folk tales do. Because then we get introduced to the terrors, right? And we, uh, and it's like they go in order of more and more disgusting, you know?
right. The first is your like manly man who's just horrible and violent.
Yes, but he loves his sons and he loves his
Right.
grandson a tremendous amount, and he's the cool one, you know. He's not, and like then we get the fag basically.
Right. The decadent,
Yeah,
the decadent, effeminate person who's like corrupt man.
yeah. Who's like he's the effete aesthete. He would be Wang
Right.
Baoxiang,
But way less well handled.
but exactly, but a really but an awful caricature of that, and like the like down to the mincing need for his mother, like
Right.
homosexual caricature.
Yes.
And then we get this really kind of awful, you know, um, you know, monster child who, is like, who is straight out of just like the nightmare sibling in the attic, unreconstructed horror trope.
Right.
Fear of disability, fear of difference. And it's and like it seems to be, you know, the thing about telling this particular story is that even if you highlight the disability issue at the first one, it's still about like the end of a dynasty, and these stories about and you've chosen to tell the story about the end of a dynasty by like, look at what, we've diluted the bloodline and then we've made them monstrous. They're this is the sort of the disabled, the decadent, the all of this stuff. And rather than showing that through like, the horrors that they, perpetrate, which of course are many, it's, we have to make them personally monstrous.
Right, exactly. It's about, the inherent horror of the kind of person that they are, as opposed to the kind of things that they have done. And it also means that escalation it really ends up making the militarist, the horrible war crimes militarist seem kind of noble by comparison.
I will say that Lubu's introduction, where he makes the girl dance till she collapses, that was very effective, but it was undercut later by all the "oh mother" stuff.
I don't actually think that you can overcome that by having one of your protagonists be disabled and having your two protagonists be gay. I actually think that often I think the metaphor is actually going to hit harder than, than a box checking representation.
Agreed. And it's like, this is sort of exactly, we talked about this actually in the Tomoe Gozen episode, but like this is like the least, I'm going to say it again, this is like the least queer homosexual couple that you could ask for.
Right. They're so manly.
They're incredibly manly. Like, we they have to fight so many times before they can even start fucking, as we've discussed. Although, this book, it saddens me that we have to complain about this, but I think it's important that we bring all this stuff up. But like, there's so much good stuff in this book.
Yes, there's
alongside all of
there's
this.
A lot of charming, funny moments. A lot of the characters are good.
I was reminded of this because like the psychic erotic bathing incident is great.
Yes!
It's probably the most swishy that they're allowed to be.
Yes, no, that's a great moment. And I didn't like the primary framing device, but I did really like where you get like the one or two sentences from all these people who are dying. It was a great way to have your big mythological epic with your high body count, but still humanize it at least a little bit, while also keeping the pace rolling. I thought that was a really good device, and it was well used.
I agree. I really enjoyed that. It didn't slow anything down, but it did keep you sort of abreast of the human cost of what was going on. But then like, we can sort of compare that with the voices of the dead who torment June, right?
Right.
Because June is a like multiple murderer because he was part of his father's cohort of sibling, terror.
Yes.
What's the word that I want? Death squad.
Yes.
Basically.
Death squad.
And he was his dad's favorite, so he got to do all of the most horrific things. And and what the witch does to him is basically break him by letting him hear the voices of the dead. She uses the old Ghost Rider penance stare on him.
Yes.
So he gets to be all like angsty and tormented about this. He gets to be Shadow the Hedgehog. There's probably a comic out there somewhere where Shadow the Hedgehog fights Ghost Rider. Probably. But unfortunately, sort of the practical way that this ends up being is that, one of the reasons that they can't get it together before the very end of the book is that when things are starting to look good, he starts getting yelled at by the voices of the dead.
Mm-hmm.
And rather than, again, the sort of the fellow feeling with the commoners that we're supposed to get from this, we are like, shut up, go away. We were almost getting to the good part.
Right.
Inevitably, the reader is going to be like, stop bothering him, go away.
Right, which ends up really weakening the entire point of this.
Exactly. And like additionally, he never, as far as we can tell, gets over that, you know, um, in any like he doesn't like come to terms with himself or, he doesn't like, make peace with the dead or anything. He just sort of gets hit by a tidal wave and that fixes him. um, and then he can have sex. So it felt like, also that's the one big character arc that I was expecting. And then it just sort of got cheated.
Yeah.
So,
And like I didn't really feel like Kima got much of a character arc. He's kind of the same guy from the beginning to the end.
yeah, I did appreciate how the book decided not to tell us how he lost his arm. I always like,
Yes.
the deliberately not telling us the thing that the two lovers share between each other, because it makes it feel more special and intimate.
Yeah, that's fair. At the time I was like, why are we even bringing this up? But that's a good point.
But like, I get the sort of the deal. I mean, his deal is that he is Kima of the something tribe. I don't remember what the
Because it doesn't matter because he made it up.
right exactly. But he is like he's an orphan who basically bigs himself up by claiming sort of kinship with this like model of barbarian masculinity, which he has essentially invented and cobbled together from stories. He's the man from Heimdall, if you've gotten that far in. Just kidding.
I've just gotten to ask some questions about that. Yes.
Disco Elysium bonus coming at some point? Question mark? Question mark? And so, like, again, this is part of the mask business, and is also a fascist thing. He's like, he's in order to give his life meaning, he's pledging to live by a code of honor that never existed.
Yes.
And that never steers him wrong, as far as I can tell. That's just his motivation from the beginning to the end, and
right,
that's fine.
And like it's when he reveals that he made it all up, it's like, well, obviously, but also that
nobody cares.
Nobody cares, and that didn't drive his like that didn't much like how nothing really changes June's personality except sort of getting hit by a tidal wave. But this, letting out this big secret doesn't really seem to change Kima in any meaningful way.
Yeah, I agree. Segue to talking about moms. So let's talk about moms.
Yes,
because there's a lot of momage in this book.
Boy, is there a lot of momage in this book. So I think I did think this was a good example of many of the same, hitting many of the same points as the wizard figure, but in a very feminine, witchy kind of way.
Yes,
which is interesting. Partly because I feel like the book is kinder to her than your average Wizles book is to its wizards. She's more wronged.
I shed a tear upon her death, and part of that is because I have some unresolved issues around wizard moms.
Yeah,
but
but so does this book. Honestly, this book has unresolved issues around wizard moms.
I mean, it does like, I mean, it's meant to be sort of a mirror of our second person protag's relationship with his grandmother,
right?
Who was awful to him a lot, but also told him all of these stories that have shaped his understanding of his identity in the world. Despite the fact that I think what is one of the best things that the book does, it turns out that he's actually from his family is actually from fantasy China, not from fantasy Southeast Asia. And he was just part of the invading force. But
yeah, that part is great. But I mean, so the thing is that there's an interesting gender thing here, where in these books, when the wizard is male, the wizard is always worse and less forgivable. And there's the sense that the wizard, there's something redeeming. When the wizard is a woman, and sort of more of a witchy mom type, as opposed to being, a sort of a more masculine wizardy type, but female. Um, there's always when the wizard's mom, basically, there's always something about her that is forgivable and redeeming. There's something just, no matter how bad her behavior is, there's something justifiable about it. I mean, we saw this in The Saint of Bright Doors, where both
Yeah.
of his parents are horrible wizards, but the witch is much more sympathetic and also just more charismatic and fun to read. And I think this is interesting. I think that we don't want to ever let moms be as evil as they actually can be.
Well, I think this is probably also just a thing that will happen with writers who are preoccupied with moms and bad moms, and also and want to think about that in mythical and mytho historical terms. I mean, in both books, they're literally goddesses,
Right.
but they're both literally from goddess cultures. They're both harken back to a destroyed like prelapsarian matriarchy, which was
Right. That's my
you know
point.
right. And like they carry with them not only that sort of promise of a better and less toxic way of living, but also like you have to imagine that there is a connection between the feeling of wanting to go back to sort of pre-agricultural goddess worship and the feeling of wanting to go back to the womb,
Right.
like going back to where it was safe, and being and like hugging mama's leg and everything's going to be okay. That sort of yearning underpins it.
Yeah, and I actually, I think that I thought that Saint of Bright Doors did a much better job with it than the Spear Cuts Through Water did, because Saint of Bright Doors really does let you see, it it leads with, no, the mom is a horror, is this sort of manipulative abuser, and even as she works her way back into the story, you're like, no, don't pick up the phone. Except that, of course, he has to pick up the phone, because even when he unplugs the phone, it's still ringing. So, and then, and this one, I mean, the moon is a great character. I mean, I think her death is what sends the book off the rails, because
Oh
she's
yeah,
not there to
100%.
drive the plot along. Um, but,
She also
I
like
thought,
functions in like a much more similar way to a Gandalf in a Lord of the Rings. You know,
yeah, but
um,
I think that, I feel like she was this, she's this really awful destructive impulse, like influence on everything around her. I mean, the book makes it clear she's the one who asked to be taken out of the sky in the first place.
yeah,
And this does not justify how she's treated afterwards, but nonetheless, she started all of this off and enables all of it and keeps it going until, and then with her death, almost destroys everything. And
yeah.
the book, and for a narrative that's just willing to hit you over the head, for a narrative voice that's willing to make everything explicit, the fact that it does not make explicit that she was really an awful person.
And like well, I mean, it's pretty explicit,
It's
but
pretty explicit, but again, this thing makes this book spells out a lot of things, and it really wants, the book can't decide whether or not it wants us to to cheer for her or condemn her.
yeah, I mean, I appreciate that it's making her a complex figure. I also, know that if she were a man, she wouldn't be given this, as you say. And also, um, I think that like it's the fact that that she breaks June by essentially unmanning him, making him unable to kill, and then like yells at him for not being able to kill when she
Yes.
needs him to kill
No,
later.
that's
It's like,
great.
it's spot on. It's really well observed. And it's like, you can take that for what it is.
Yeah.
We don't need to hammer it, but the fact that the end of all their arcs together is them sort of mourning her death at the end, after she's literally become Mama Bear and come to the rescue, is something else. I think that if you want a more, maybe a more satisfying, like, metaphorical exploration of the sort of the wanting the mom goddess and being disappointed, I think maybe we can look to the tortoises.
Yes.
Because, like, first of all, I can't believe that we talked about disability and didn't talk about the defect,
Right.
who is my favorite character in the book.
Absolutely.
um, and
Who
who
deserves a better
deserved
narrative
better.
arc?
God,
Like
poor thing.
who deserved better in terms of what happens to him? Yes, but also who just like deserved a better narrative arc.
Yeah, I mean the end of his life. I mean, it's sort of like the sort of the thing that the book gives him is that he ends up like freeing his people basically by sharing with them the vision of peace and freedom that he was able to experience. And I'm
Yes,
like, okay, so he
but
did something,
yes,
but that's not quite the same thing as like because he ends up. I mean, his arc is like he sort of gradually wakes up to the world around him, and then is immediately entrangled in the entrangled. Thank you, Isaac. Is immediately. God damn it! What's the actual word that I want?
entangled,
Entrained.
entrained. Okay.
Into the old pattern when he hears what he thinks is his goddess mother's voice finally, when
Yeah.
it's in fact the way that he couldn't, it's like his disability was kind of a superpower for a moment, and then when he gets better, quote unquote, or like he's able to hear her finally, it kills him because it turns out that that was the horrible Lubu having eaten his mom, and
Yes.
using the mom signal to lead him astray. uh so yeah, I mean, that's, if you want sort of like a brutal story about the way that that sort of matriarchal nostalgia can be used to control and trap people.
That's true. That is a good point.
It's in the book.
That is
it's
a
just
good
really,
point.
really unpleasant.
Yes. But of course, that's not the, that's the matriarchal culture doing it, but the actual person doing it is the super effeminate, decadent man who has, eaten his mother.
Yes,
Not truly
exactly.
a mother.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Yep.
and I think it's what I wanted wasn't so much for the book to be like, no, this person is bad. Um, it's that I don't think that we actually. I think it's actually a failure of June and Kima again. Um,
Mm.
we don't actually get to see the impact of the way that she's messing with them. Like, she berates June for not being willing to kill, but it doesn't really seem to have really land. He's just like, no, I'm not going to kill. Remember, I told you.
Yeah.
And it doesn't damage their relationship even. Like, nothing damages her relationship with June, and nothing she does after she makes him a pacifist, which, causes her no end of frustration and disgust later. Um, but none of that, nothing else she does seems to really damage June.
Yeah, they're very trauma immune, these boys. It's like,
Right. And everybody who does experience trauma dies horribly.
yeah, it's hard to, I mean, and this is what I was talking about, like between like, what we actually need is uh is like this kind of strength to save things, and you know the weakness of being tormented by guilt is in fact is like a curse that's been put on him. And the which one and which like sort of son of the emperor is the cool one. And then finally at the end, this whole like the heritage of the spear, um
Mm-hmm.
and like the fact that everybody who's gathered together in this big atrium is like part of the spear's heritage, like literally.
Right.
um and how, and this obsession with the old country, and it's like, even as it eats our Yu's family, like the war comes and takes his father and takes his brothers, and leaves him alone and stuck. The implication seems to be that his problem is that he has been unable to move on and go to the war and find himself because he's the only one who's left behind.
Well, there is also the brother who goes off to school and like makes something of himself.
This is true.
But yeah, no, but it is it feels like he's sort of been stuck in this holding pattern because, and almost that this is some sort of damage, almost like he has been kind of feminized. There's this sort of damage that being the, receptacle for his grandmother's stories, means that he can neither go off to the war to die, nor, go to the big city to make something of himself. He's just stuck.
Right. I found myself asking, like, is you supposed to be a man or a woman? Because of the sort of the way in which he is his grandmother's favorite.
See, to me, that read as absolutely being a man.
I suppose that is true. But like but he doesn't go to war and he doesn't go out to
right. But
leave the house. And he ends up being the person who cares for his grandfather. And like in a book that's about gay heroes, basically, it feels like there's a lot of anxiety about his ability to be properly masculine in there.
Right. I mean, the thing is, the reason why the you feels so masculine to me is that the not doing anything feels like a failure versus being stuck at home. All the possibilities that, and paths that our you doesn't go down are male ones. There's no sense of passing up on, getting married and having children or whatever.
Yeah, it was a momentary confusion on my part, but like, I was like, I assumed he was a man because it was me and it was talking to me and I'm a man to begin with because I'm not very bright. But when I actually stopped and thought about it, I was like, have we actually been told what gender this person is? And eventually we are, but I think that that's sort of his inability to take action is kind of the crux of his story.
Right. Which unfortunately makes for a bit of a boring story.
Alexis is taking a swing at Hamlet there. Kick a dude while he's down, why don't you?
Let's say some good things about the book.
Let's say some good things about the book, because again, I had a lot of fun with it, and there was a lot of cool stuff.
Yeah.
Like the sudden appearance of a troop of dope smoking apes.
Yeah, they just like randomly show up.
That part part was great.
Oh, you were counting on these warriors rebel warriors to help you out. Haha, no. We stole their stuff and their drugs.
Yeah, and like they're just watching the two of them fight on the ground for no reason. And then that scene ends with the Empress, who has to carefully marshal every ounce of her power, getting so frustrated with him that she just explodes the cart that they were in, just out of petulance.
Yes.
I mean, that's such a great scene in like 9 different ways.
Yes.
It really, you know who every character is, and even though the apes don't show up again, you even get a really great sense of who the apes are.
Yes, I think actually that is something that this book does really well. Is that all the little moments feel like they are adding up to giving you the sense of the world.
Yes. And they're funny and interesting.
Yeah.
I was actually really disappointed at the reveal that the bird was the third kid.
Yeah. No, me too.
Like, I thought the moment where they the bird is trying to get them to go the good way in the sort of the Delta rivers, and they end up going the bad way, was like, okay, your mom will make you feel so bad about your dad's job that you were no longer able to trust a cool bird because you think nature wants you to die. Fantastic, and like I thought, oh, cool bird, because of course I would all the way through. And then I'm like, oh, this guy, the bird acts more intelligently than the kid ends up being.
Right.
It's both disappointing and it feels like a cheat. But anyway, we were focusing on positive things.
Up until then, the bird is really cool.
Yep.
Um, the Defect is a great character.
Defect is a great character. The narrator does a really good job of giving him a voice that trails off into a giggle at every point without making it annoying. Again,
Oh,
very good
nice.
job.
That's real impressive.
Yeah.
And the Empress in the Moon is a great character.
Yes, she's so angry.
She's so angry,
And
and
and it is all her fucking fault,
right,
you know. And she knows this, but she's still so angry.
right.
I like that it acknowledges, like, it brings up the idea of, oh, maybe if women were in charge, all this violence wouldn't be happening, and the
No.
rest of the characters are like, nah. And then it goes on to explain how, Shen, is in charge for a while, and it's the same old.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, I liked the very, very ending sort of what happens after to these generations. I mean, I actually thought that did a good job of sort of handling the transition from myth into history.
yeah, I think that I did a really good job there. It's like while this spear is languishing in this treasure barge, the world outside, catches the gears of history and becomes real. You know,
Yeah.
and as is often the case with situations like that, reality reality arrives in the form of the Chinese military. Like, you're China now. um,
Yeah.
but but that is but yeah, no, I was like, I was all getting set to be like, oh, I hate the way this is ending, and then I got that bit and I was like, oh god, that is really smart and good. And then it went, and then and I was like, oh, I'm really glad that it didn't cheat the ending, and then it cheated the ending. I was like,
Yep.
fuck.
Random little things. Shout out, the end papers of the book are very nice. They've got
Oh,
yeah, see, this is something that the audiobook does not have, unfortunately, but it's a really lovely, very stylized fantasy kind of map, but not really, of just like all the symbolic things in the book.
cool.
So yeah, no, it's whoever did that, good job.
Hmm.
Good job, Random House Books. I love end papers.
I like I think the world building in general is very good. I don't like, this is not, as far as I can tell, drawn from any particular
Yeah.
mythic, pre-existing mythic setting, and it really feels, when I say it's fantasy Southeast Asia, I have to be that vague because it's no country in particular. It is just the old country.
Yeah.
And this, all of the mythological stuff and the old stories, and the sort of the red peacocks and the purple elks, all feel really, compelling, and I'm like, good stuff.
Yeah, no, great imagery. And I think the author has a really good sense of managing world building. The exposition is well handled, but also does just a really good job of showing you just the right amount of the world to hint at how much larger it is without feeling the
Mhm.
need to explain or rationalize everything. And honestly, I just wish more fantasy would do that.
It's true. And it's like, we often complain that the weirdness is left out.
The weirdness is kept in, and
The weirdness is
it
absolutely kept into
really,
this one.
yeah, and it really makes a huge difference. I think that if you took the weirdness out of this book, it would just be a really bad book. But because
Yeah.
it's willing to show how weird and occasionally even contradictory myths get, that allows a lot of the stuff that wouldn't otherwise work to get pulled off.
Indeed. And I also like, it's there. It also has a bunch of, it has a bunch of little meta jokes in it, which it can do because of its framing device.
Mhm.
And I find many of the, often I find these annoying, as we discussed with the last book that we read. But I really did like the fact that he, ends a couple of scenes in a row with Kima getting knocked out, and then the Empress is like, I hope he doesn't get post-concussion syndrome. That would make him really useless to me. You know,
Right.
it's like, thank you for that. I appreciate you acknowledging that that's a bit of a cheat. But yeah, no, I think ultimately frustrating, but like I still had a really good time reading it. Would be
Yeah,
my
I
sort
think
of,
yeah.
and like the idea that if you eat your grandma, you get high and have like a a oneness with the universe trip. You know,
Again, not afraid to be weird. I
not
think
afraid to be weird.
yeah, I think there's a lot of stuff in the book that made me disappointed and mad, and I think there's a lot of stuff that's just um really unexamined contemporary cultural prejudice and problems just getting regurgitated that ends up undermining a lot of the good stuff the book is doing. But the book is doing a lot of good stuff, and there's a lot to chew on, and I would rather a book be an interesting failure than a, boring success.
I'm 100% with you on that. So yes, next time. Well, I think that the ideally the Carmilla episode will come out before this.
Okay. Well, the next time I think we might, I think the next one I'm about to add to the list is someone you can build a nest in, which is
Ooh,
an interesting failure in a completely different set of ways.
excellent. Well, I look forward to it.
I think you'll probably hate it, but that's
I
okay.
hope that our audience is enjoying the running joke where like a good 30% of the time the book that we say will be the next book that we do, and these doesn't turn out to be the next book that we do because we like to change things around.
Oh, see, I just
Um,
assumed you were editing these to
I
like
tried for a while, but
reflect what's
it was
accurate.
just futile after a certain point. And I was just like, whatever, you know.
I see.
They'll
Okay.
figure out that the next one isn't this one, isn't the next one that we say. Uh,
I hope that this has become a funny running joke to you guys.
there's there's a certain point where laziness takes over for
No,
me.
no,
I
no.
apologize.
It's totally reasonable. I just
Yeah,
I just didn't realize that this, that we'd been accidentally lying to our audience so much.
I caught a few of them and then I gave up. Yeah.
That's fair. Nope, nope, totally reasonable. All right. Anyway, next time there will be a book, almost certainly,
Yes,
unless
that
it's a
I can
cartoon.
guarantee. Yes. Yeah. Yes. Great. Yes.
All right.
All right. Bye.
Bye.